He had $11 billion, 4 homes on 3 continents, and a private jet that never carried him anywhere near happiness. So one Tuesday morning, Ethan Cross did something no one who knew him would have believed. He put on a torn jacket, rubbed dirt into his hands, and walked out of his own skyscraper to become nobody. He wanted to know one thing and one thing only. If a woman could ever love him, not his name, not his money, not the empire behind him, but him, he did not expect to find the answer in a 24-hour diner across a chipped porcelain plate from a waitress who had exactly $40 in her checking account and the kindest eyes he had ever seen. This is the story of Ethan Cross and Grace Miller. Stay until the end, because what happens between them will make you believe in something you thought you'd stopped believing in a long time ago. Before we begin, if you love slow burn stories like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we post a new one every week. Now, let's begin. Ethan Cross was 38 years old, and by every external measure, he had won at life. He'd built Cross Dynamics from a garage in Austin into a logistics and technology empire that touched nearly every supply chain in North America. Forbes had put him on 3 covers. He'd been named to a 40 under 40 list so many times the magazine had started calling him for quotes about other people's success. And yet, he stood at the window of his Chicago penthouse most nights, 61 floors up, and looked down at a city of 9 million people, and felt, with a clarity that frightened him, that he did not know a single one of them. His inner circle told him what he wanted to hear. His board told him what protected their equity. His last relationship, 18 months with a woman named Vanessa Cole, a socialite whose family owned half of Lakeshore Drive, had ended when he'd overheard her describe him at a party as a very efficient investment. A very efficient investment. That phrase had lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs and never left. His grandfather, Walter Cross, had started the company with a single delivery truck and a promise he used to repeat at every Thanksgiving. The day money changes who you are is the day you've already lost. Walter had passed 2 years ago. Ethan kept a photograph of him on his desk. The old man in grease-stained coveralls, grinning next to that first truck, and some nights, Ethan couldn't look at it without feeling like he'd broken a promise he never got the chance to make out loud. He'd tried therapy. His therapist, Dr. Okafor, a sharp patient woman in her 50s, had said something to him 3 months ago that he hadn't been able to shake. Ethan, she'd said, you've built a life so insulated from consequence that you no longer know what's real. You don't know if people like you or like what you can do for them. And until you know that difference, you will never trust anyone, including yourself. He'd laughed it off in the session. He hadn't laughed it off since, so he did something reckless. Something his board would have called insane. Something his lawyers would have called a liability. Something his publicist would have called a nightmare. He decided to disappear, not permanently. Just long enough, he would take a leave, publicly framed as an extended strategic retreat, and he would walk into the world with nothing. No driver, no card, no name that meant anything. He would find out, once and for all, whether a single person could look at him with nothing to gain and choose to be kind anyway. His best friend and chief operating officer, a broad-shouldered, endlessly loyal man named Marcus Webb, was the only person who knew the real plan. "You understand this is insane," Marcus said, standing in Ethan's office with his arms crossed, watching Ethan roll up a set of secondhand clothes into a duffel bag. "You're worth $11 billion and you want to go sleep in a shelter." "Not a shelter," Ethan said. "I have a room, a cheap one, above a laundromat in Pilsen. I found it under a fake name. And what happens when the board asks where you are? You tell them I'm evaluating expansion opportunities in the Pacific Northwest. That buys us 6 weeks before anyone starts asking real questions." Marcus studied him for a long moment. He'd known Ethan since business school, had watched him build something extraordinary and lose something quieter along the way. "What are you actually looking for, Ethan?" Ethan zipped the duffel bag shut. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'll know it when I find it." He left his phone, his watch, a piece worth more than most people's cars, and every card in his wallet except for $140 in cash, folded into a jacket pocket that had a hole in the lining. He kept one flip phone, prepaid, untraceable, for emergencies only, and gave the number to Marcus alone. Then Ethan Cross walked out of his building through the loading dock, and by the time he reached the street, he was nobody at all. He decided, somewhere around the third block, that he needed a name. Not a fake one that would feel like a lie every time someone said it. Something close enough to the truth that he could answer to it without flinching. Ethan Cole. It felt strange in his mouth. It felt, strangely, like relief. Part 2. The Diner on Fuller Street, 8 to 16. By his fourth night on the street, Ethan Cross understood something he never had before. Cold is not an abstraction. Cold is a physical opponent. It gets into your knees and your jaw, and it does not let go. He'd learned, quickly, which alleys held heat vents, which benches the police wouldn't roust you from before 5 a.m., and how little $140 actually was when it had to become food. And warmth and the occasional necessity stretched across weeks. He had also learned, with a kind of shame he hadn't expected, how many people would not look at him, how his own eyes, the eyes that used to command boardrooms, now made strangers glance away like he was a smear on a window they didn't want to clean. It was on the fourth night, half frozen, that he pushed open the door of a place called Miller's, a 24-hour diner on Fuller Street with a buzzing neon sign missing its apostrophe and a bell over the door that rang too cheerfully for how tired he felt. He had exactly $6, 40 to his name that night. Enough, maybe, for coffee and toast, if he was careful. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back in a hasty knot, wearing a name tag that said Grace in handwriting, not print, like someone had made it themselves or lost the real one and improvised. She had flour on one forearm and the particular exhaustion of someone working a double shift, but when she looked at him, she didn't do the thing everyone else did. She didn't look away. "Sit anywhere you like on," she said. "Coffee's on while you decide." He sat in a booth by the window, and a few minutes later she set down a mug without being asked, along with a small ceramic dish of creamers. "I only have," he started, reaching for the crumpled bills in his pocket. "It's coffee," she said. "It's not going to bankrupt the place." She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that made something in his chest, something that had been clenched for years, loosen by half a degree. "You want to see a menu, or you already know what $6 gets you?" He almost laughed. "Almost." "Toast," he said. "Whatever's cheapest." She nodded, wrote nothing down. She'd clearly worked this from memory, and disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back 12 minutes later, she set down not toast, but a full plate, 2 eggs, hash browns, a short stack of pancakes, and yes, toast, tucked along the side. "I didn't order all this," he said quietly, doing the math on money he didn't have. "Kitchen made a mistake," Grace said, not quite meeting his eyes, wiping down the counter beside his booth like the conversation was already over. "Happens sometimes at the end of a shift. Better it goes to somebody than in the trash." It was, of course, not a mistake. He understood that even then, even as a stranger to her, even before he understood anything else about who she was, he ate slowly, savoring it the way he hadn't savored a meal in years. Not the 11-course tasting menus at Cross Dynamics galas, not the private chef's Sunday dinners in the penthouse. This plate, in this booth, on Fuller Street, when he stood to leave, he set down every dollar he had. "I can't take all that for a coffee," she said, sliding 2 bills back across the table toward him. "Then, let me leave it for the mistake," he said. Something in her expression shifted, surprised maybe that he'd understood and hadn't made her say it out loud. "Careful," she said, almost teasing, "or I'll start liking you. Would that be so bad?" The words were out of his mouth before he'd fully decided to say them. She tilted her head, studying him, not with pity and not with suspicion, but with a kind of open curiosity he hadn't been looked at with in longer than he could remember. "Ask me again when you're not eating on my dime," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. He walked back out into the cold that night, warmer than he'd been in 4 days, and it had nothing to do with the food. He went back the next night. And the night after that, he started picking up day labor where he could, unloading trucks before dawn, sweeping out a mechanic's garage, 2 blocks from the shelter he sometimes stayed in, once helping an elderly man named Otis carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs for $10 and a genuine gap-toothed thank you that meant more to Ethan than any handshake he'd ever gotten in a boardroom. It wasn't much. It didn't need to be much. It gave him just enough to walk into Miller's and order something real, and to stop letting Grace quietly absorb the cost of his dignity. He learned her rhythms. She worked the overnight shift most weeknights, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., because the overnight differential paid better and because, as she mentioned once, almost offhand, wiping down the counter at 2 a.m. She had a younger brother, Danny, 17 years old, and someone needed to be around during the day to make sure he got to school and didn't fall in with the wrong crowd their neighborhood made too easy to fall into. Our mom passed when I was 22. Grace told him one night, 3 weeks in, when the diner was empty except for the two of them and a trucker asleep in a back booth. Dad wasn't really in the picture before that, and even less after. So it's just been me and Danny for 8 years. That's a lot for one person, Ethan said. It's what you do, Grace said. Like it wasn't a sacrifice, just a fact of gravity. He's a good kid, wants to study engineering. I'm not going to be the reason that doesn't happen. Ethan sat with that for a long moment. He thought about his own path to engineering. Stanford, a full ride he hadn't even needed. A garage funded by his grandfather's retirement savings that he'd paid back tenfold within 3 years. He thought about how differently the same dream could cost two different people. You ever think about doing something for yourself? He asked. Something that isn't about keeping everyone else afloat? Grace considered the question longer than he expected. I used to want to be a chef, she said finally. Real cooking, not diner cooking, though I love this place. Don't get me wrong. I used to make up recipes as a kid, before Mom got sick. I had this whole notebook. She laughed, a little embarrassed. It's probably still in a box somewhere. What happened to it? Life happened to it, she said simply, and there was no self-pity in the way she said it. Just the plain arithmetic of a life that had asked more of her than it gave back. Culinary school costs money. Money was for Danny's tutoring and rent and the electric bill in January. Dreams go in a box. Bills don't. Ethan didn't say anything for a while. He thought about the $11 billion sitting in accounts he wasn't touching, about how absurd it was to sit across from a woman rationing dreams like they were a finite resource. While he had more resource than he could spend in 6 lifetimes, he wanted badly, in that moment, to tell her the truth. To say, I could change this, I could change all of it tonight with one phone call. He didn't. Partly because he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that if he told her now, she would never trust another word he said. And partly because some new, unfamiliar part of him wanted to know what it would feel like to earn something the long way, for once. To be worth something to somebody without a check attached. You'll get back to it, he said instead. The notebook. I believe that. Grace looked at him. This stranger, this man, with rough hands and a second-hand coat and a way of talking that didn't quite match the rest of him, though she hadn't placed why yet. And something in her chest did a small, cautious thing it hadn't done in a long time. You're a strange one, Ethan Cole, she said softly. You have no idea? He said, and meant it more than she could possibly know, narrator break. If you're enjoying this story so far, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, now's a good time to hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to turn neither Ethan nor Grace sees coming. Winter deepened. And so did the strange, unhurried friendship growing in the booth by the window. Ethan met Danny by accident one Saturday afternoon, when Grace's shift ran long and her brother came by to walk her home, backpack slung over one shoulder, a battered chemistry textbook tucked under his arm. He was tall and gangly in the way of teenagers who hadn't quite grown into their own limbs, with Grace's same steady eyes. This is Ethan, Grace said. He's a regular, the toast guy. Danny said, deadpan, and Ethan laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprised him with how unfamiliar it felt. The toast guy, Ethan confirmed. Danny sat with them for 20 minutes, working through a physics problem set at the counter, while Grace poured him a milkshake she absolutely charged the shift's tip jar for, not him. Without really deciding to, Ethan leaned over and pointed out an error in Danny's torque calculation, casually, like it was nothing, though it was the kind of correction that came from an engineering degree, not a diner regular's idle curiosity. Danny looked up at him, surprised. How'd you know that? Ethan caught himself. Read a lot, he said. Not much else to do at night. Grace watched the exchange with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and a question she wasn't ready to ask yet. He also, in those weeks, got to know Otis. The elderly man from the groceries, it turned out, was Miller's most loyal regular, a retired railway worker who'd known Grace's mother and who occupied the same stool at the counter every single morning like it had been assigned to him at birth. That girl, Otis told Ethan one morning, nodding toward Grace as she refilled sugar dispensers 3 booths away, has been holding up a roof that was never hers to hold since she was 22 years old. Anybody comes around here, sniffing at her better mean it. She doesn't have room in her life for people who don't mean it. I mean it, Ethan said. Before he'd fully thought it through, Otis studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. A long, unhurried, appraising look, the kind old men give when they've seen enough of the world to know the difference between talk and truth. We'll see, Otis said. But he said it without unkindness, and Ethan understood it as the closest thing to a blessing the old man was willing to give a stranger this early. It was around this time that Ethan started, quietly, to notice things about Miller's itself. The walk-in cooler that hummed too loud and too often needed defrosting mid-shift. The soft spot in the floor by booth 6 that Grace always warned new customers to step around. The owner, a tired, decent man named Frank Delgado, who'd inherited the place from his own father and who confided to Ethan one slow Tuesday that a corporate buyer had made an offer on the building last month, an offer that would demolish the diner and put up mixed-use retail, and that Frank was seriously considering because the diner's margins had been shrinking for 3 years and he didn't know how much longer he could keep 6 people employed on them. Ethan asked, carefully, who the buyer was. Some company, Frank said. Kessler Group, real estate arm out of one of those big investment firms. They've been buying up half of Fuller Street. Ethan filed that name away with a stillness that didn't show on his face. He knew Kessler Group. He'd sat across a negotiating table from its principal, Douglas Kessler, twice. He said nothing that night, but something in him had shifted. This was no longer an abstract experiment in anonymity. This was Grace's roof, and Danny's school route, and Otis's stool at the counter, and it was, he realized with a discomfort he hadn't expected, something he now genuinely could not stand to lose. 6 weeks into his disappearance, the outside world began to leak in. It started small. A woman at a bus stop did a double take at him, frowned, looked away, unconvinced by whatever she thought she'd seen. Then, a week later, a man in a rideshare vehicle, idling at a red light, stared a beat too long through the window before the light changed and the car pulled away. Ethan knew, with the particular instinct of a man who'd spent a decade being recognized in rooms full of strangers, that his 6 weeks of invisibility were beginning to run out. Marcus called the emergency line twice in 1 week. A first. The board is asking harder questions, Marcus said, voice tight with the particular stress of a man protecting a secret bigger than he was built to carry alone. Vanessa's been telling people you dropped off the map because of her. It's becoming a story, Ethan. I can hold it another 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Give me 3, Ethan said. I need 3. What's in Chicago that's worth this? Marcus asked. Not accusing, just genuinely asking, because he'd known Ethan long enough to hear something in his voice that hadn't been there in years. Ethan looked across the street. Through the frost-fogged window of a payphone he'd found still miraculously operational at the diner's glowing sign. Someone, he said, someone worth it. He didn't tell Marcus about Grace, not yet. He wasn't ready to make her real to anyone else, wasn't ready to let this fragile, unnamed thing between them exist anywhere outside the 4 walls of Miller's and the cold Chicago streets between there and wherever he was sleeping that week. But the tension was building on both fronts now. The world closing in from outside, and something closing the distance between him and Grace from within. It happened on a Thursday night in late February, during a slow hour with sleet coming down sideways against the windows. Grace was folding napkins at the counter, and Ethan was helping. Badly, by his own admission, folding them into shapes that looked nothing like the crisp triangles she made without looking. You're terrible at this, she said, laughing, reaching over to fix his fold. I have other skills, he said. Name one. He thought about it, really thought about it, searching for something true he could say without saying too much. I'm good at seeing what's broken in a system, he said finally, and figuring out how to fix it before it collapses. Grace looked at him a beat too long. That's a strange thing to be good at for a guy who sweeps out garages. I contain multitudes, he said, and she laughed again. But there was something searching underneath it now. A question forming that she hadn't quite let herself ask. The napkins forgotten, they stood close together at the counter, the sleet ticking against the glass. Otis's stool empty at this hour, Frank in the back doing inventory. Can I ask you something? Grace said, quieter now. Anything. Where were you? Before this? Before the street. She wasn't asking with judgment. She was asking like someone who had started, against every instinct she'd built over 8 hard years, to care about the answer. You don't talk like someone who's always lived like this. You don't move like it either. Ethan felt the truth rise in his throat, right there, so close to the surface he could taste it, tell her. I had a life that fell apart, he said instead. True, in its way, if not in the way she'd understand it. I made choices. Some of them cost me more than I expected. That's not really an answer. I know, he said. I'm working up to a real one. I promise you that. Grace studied him, and something in her face softened even as her eyes stayed sharp. Okay, she said. I can wait for it. But she hesitated like she was deciding whether to say the next part. Don't wait too long. I've spent a lot of years being careful with who I let matter. I think you already matter more than I meant to let you. It was the closest either of them had come to saying it out loud. He reached over, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, which she didn't, and covered her hand with his on the counter. You matter to me too, he said. More than I know how to explain yet, but I will. I swear to you I will. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Outside, the sleet kept coming down, and inside Miller's, something quiet and enormous had just shifted into place. It fell apart 4 days later, and it fell apart publicly. A junior reporter for Chicago Business Blog, working a slow news week, had noticed Cross Dynamics' stock dip on unusual volume and unconfirmed rumors about its missing CEO. Digging for anything, she'd tracked down a grainy photo, taken, it turned out, by the very rideshare driver who'd stared too long at the red light 3 weeks earlier and run a story with the headline, Missing Billionaire Ethan Cross Spotted Living on Chicago's South Side. Mental Health Crisis or Elaborate Stunt. It spread by morning. By noon, it was on 3 local news stations. By evening, it had reached national outlets. And Marcus was fielding calls he could no longer contain. Ethan learned about it the way most of Chicago did. From a newspaper someone had left on a diner counter. His own face staring back up at him from a photo he hadn't known was being taken under a headline that turned 6 weeks of the most honest experience of his life into a spectacle. He was standing in Miller's when Grace saw it too. She'd picked up the same paper to clear the table, glanced down out of habit, and gone very, very still. Her eyes moved from the photo to Ethan, really looked at him, the way you look at a stranger for the first time, stripping away every assumption you'd built. And Ethan watched, in real time, as 8 years of hard-won trust collapsed like something structural giving way all at once. Grace, he started. You're him, she said, quiet, flat, disbelieving. You're Ethan Cross. Grace, let me explain. Explain what? Her voice rose now, sharp with a hurt that went bone deep. That you're worth billions of dollars, and you sat in my diner every night eating food I gave you for free because I felt sorry for you. That you let me tell you about my mother and Danny's tuition and my notebook, my stupid recipe notebook, while you had $11 billion sitting in a bank account somewhere? It wasn't like that, Ethan said, and he could hear how weak it sounded even as he said it. Then, what was it like, Ethan? She threw the paper down on the counter between them, and it landed with a slap that seemed to echo through the whole diner. Frank had come out from the back, Otis had turned on his stool, and the whole restaurant had gone silent, watching, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a very rich man decided to play poor for a few weeks, to slum it, to watch how the other half lives. And I was just, what? A character in your little experiment? Something to observe? You were never that. You were the realest thing that's happened to me in 10 years, don't. Her voice cracked, and she hated that it cracked. He could see it, hated giving him even that much. Don't you dare make this romantic. I have spent my whole life clawing for every dollar, watching every choice, terrified one bad month would cost my brother his future. and you played at that, like it was a costume you could take off whenever you got bored." "I never got bored," Ethan said, "not for 1 second. Grace, everything I felt in this diner was real. Every conversation, Then why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. 6 weeks, Ethan. 6 weeks of me telling you things I've never told anyone, and you couldn't find one moment to say, "Actually, I'm a billionaire and this is all an experiment." He had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse, because it was an excuse, dressed up as a reason. He told himself he was protecting the truth of what was growing between them. But standing here now, watching her face, he understood the truth was uglier and simpler. He'd been afraid. Afraid that the moment she knew, she would look at him the way Vanessa's efficient investment comment had once made him feel. Reduced to a number, a resource, a name on a building. He'd been so afraid of being loved for his money that he'd risked never being loved at all. "I was scared," he admitted quietly in front of Otis and Frank and the whole silent diner. "I've spent my whole life not knowing if anyone wanted me or just wanted what I have. And for 6 weeks with you, I finally knew. I didn't want to lose that by telling you the truth too soon." "You didn't lose it by telling me," Grace said, and her voice had gone terribly quiet, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "You lost it by lying." "There's a difference, Ethan. There's a difference between not knowing if someone loves you for the right reasons and deceiving someone so thoroughly they can't even trust their own memory of the last 6 weeks. She untied her apron, folded it with hands that were shaking, and set it on the counter. "I need you to leave," she said. "And I need you to not come back. Grace, please." And there was something in the way she said it, not anger anymore, just an exhausted, bottomless hurt that made him understand arguing further would only make it worse. He left. The bell over the door rang the same cheerful ring it always had, and it had never sounded so wrong. Ethan didn't go back to the penthouse. Not yet. He checked into a hotel. An ordinary one, not the kind he used to favor, and sat for 2 full days doing something he hadn't done in years. Nothing. No calls. No strategy. Just the accumulated weight of watching Grace's face change from trust to devastation, playing on a loop he couldn't turn off. Marcus found him on the 3rd day, having finally tracked the burner phone's last known location. "The board wants you back in New York by Monday," Marcus said, sitting across from him in the hotel room. "Vanessa's doing press. The stock's stabilizing, but it needs your face on it, fast." "I don't care about the stock," Ethan, who had known him for 17 years, sat back and studied his friend with something close to wonder. "You actually mean that? I actually mean that. Ah, who is she?" Ethan told him. All of it. Grace, Danny, Otis, Frank, the diner, the Kessler Group's offer on the building, and the moment on Thursday night when he'd covered her hand with his and, for the first time in a decade, believed completely that what he felt was being felt back. "And you lied to her for 6 weeks, Marcus said, not unkindly, just plainly. "I know. So what are you going to do about it?" Ethan looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline, a skyline he owned a piece of, quite literally, and none of which had ever once made him feel the way 12 square feet of diner booth had. "I'm going to earn it back," he said, "not with money, with time. However long it takes." He started first with the thing he could actually fix without asking Grace for anything at all. He called Douglas Kessler directly, his real voice, his real name, the full weight of cross dynamics behind it, and made an offer for the Fuller Street building that Kessler Group could not refuse. Double what they'd offered Frank, on the single condition that Miller's Diner keep its lease, rent frozen, for the next 25 years, with Frank Delgado retaining full ownership and operational control. He didn't tell Grace. He didn't tell Frank it was him, either. The offer went through a shell entity, structured so that all Frank would ever know was that some anonymous benefactor believed in his diner enough to guarantee it a future. Then Ethan did something else. He tracked down, through Marcus and a very patient private investigator, the culinary program Grace had once dreamed about, a respected 2-year certificate program at a Chicago institute, with a scholarship fund for working adults that, as it happened, had gone unused for its full amount this cycle. He didn't buy her a spot. He wouldn't insult her that way. He simply made sure the scholarship fund was fully and permanently endowed, open to any qualifying applicant, administered by the school itself, with no name attached, that could ever please be traced back to him. He did these not to buy her back. He understood, with a clarity that would have surprised the old Ethan Cross, that love could not be purchased, only made possible. He did them because he'd meant what he said in the diner, that he cared about her life continuing to open up, whether or not she ever spoke to him again. Then, and only then, did he go to see her. He didn't go to the diner. That wouldn't be fair to her. She deserved a space that was hers, uncomplicated by him. Instead, he found Danny first, asked him, honestly, plainly, whether Grace would even be willing to hear him out, and told the boy the truth about who he was and what he'd done, because Danny deserved that honesty more than anyone. Danny studied him for a long time. Grace's same steady eyes weighing him. She hasn't smiled right in 2 weeks, Danny finally said. Not since the paper. I don't know if she'll talk to you. But she used to talk about you like. He stopped, shook his head. Like you were the first thing in 8 years that wasn't a bill or a responsibility. That's not nothing, whatever you did. Ethan waited outside the diner for 3 nights before Grace finally agreed to see him. Not inside, but on the sidewalk out front, arms crossed, unwilling to give him more ground than that. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me tonight, Ethan said. I know I don't get to decide when that happens, or if it does at all. I'm here because I owe you the truth, all of it without a costume this time. He told her everything, not just the 6 weeks, the years before it. Vanessa's efficient investment comment. Dr. Okafor's question about whether he'd ever know the difference between being wanted and being used. His grandfather's photograph on his desk, and the promise about money never being allowed to change who you were. A promise, Ethan admitted, painfully, he'd been failing to keep for a long time before he ever walked into Miller's. I didn't come to your diner to find a story for a magazine profile, he said. I came because I was drowning in a life that had everything except anyone who wanted me. And then I met you, and for 6 weeks, I got to find out what it felt like to be a person again instead of a portfolio. I should have told you the truth the moment I understood how much you'd come to mean to me. I didn't, because I was a coward about the one thing that actually mattered. I'm sorry, Grace. Not for who I am, for how long I let you not know it. Grace was quiet for a long moment, arms still crossed, the streetlight throwing long shadows across the wet sidewalk. Frank got an anonymous buyout offer, she said finally, not quite looking at him. Guaranteed lease, 25 years. He's been walking around for a week like someone gave him his whole life back. I heard, Ethan said carefully. And the Culinary Institute called me yesterday, she went on, voice tightening. Said a scholarship fund I applied to 2 years ago and never heard back from suddenly has money in it. Full ride. No name attached. She finally looked at him directly. You want to tell me that's a coincidence? I want to tell you. Ethan said slowly that I did those things because they were right, not because I expected them to buy back what I broke. Frank's diner deserved to survive whether or not you ever spoke to me again. Your notebook deserved a second chance whether or not I was ever in your life to see it happen. I'm not trying to purchase your forgiveness, Grace. I don't think that's possible, and I wouldn't want it even if it were. I just didn't want to be a person who could fix those things and chose not to, on top of everything else. Grace's arms slowly uncrossed. Something in her posture, held rigid for 2 weeks, began, just slightly, to soften. You lied to me for 6 weeks, she says, quieter now. I did, and you're standing here telling me you're not trying to buy your way out of that. I'm not. I know I can't. I'm telling you I love you, Grace Miller. And I have loved you since the 4th night I walked into that diner with 6.40 cents in my pocket and you gave me a plate I couldn't afford because you decided I was worth feeding. Everything after that was real. The only thing that was ever false was the excuse I made for not telling you who I was standing in front of you. I don't need you to forgive me tonight. I need you to know that whatever it takes, time, distance, proof, all of it, I'm not going anywhere. I'm done disappearing from the people who matter. The sleet had turned sometime in the last few minutes into a soft, quiet snow, the kind that made the whole street feel briefly, impossibly still. Grace looked at him for a long time. Then, finally, she stepped forward, not into his arms, not yet, but close enough that the distance between them had, for the first time in 2 weeks, meaningfully closed. You get to earn it back, she said, slowly, on my terms. Starting with actual honesty about everything, every single time. Can you do that? For as long as you'll let me, Ethan said. That's the whole rest of my life if you'll have me. She almost smiled. The first real one in 2 weeks, small and cautious, but real. Don't get ahead of yourself, Cole, she said. Then, softer, Ethan. It was the first time she'd used his real name. It landed in his chest like something finally settling into place after years of not knowing where it belonged. A year later, Miller's Diner still stood on Fuller Street, its lease secured for 25 more, its neon sign finally fixed. Apostrophe and all, a small joke between Grace and Ethan that neither of them ever explained to Frank. Grace finished her culinary certificate that spring, top of her program, and opened a small evening pop-up inside Miller's twice a week, serving dishes straight out of the recipe notebook she'd finally pulled out of storage. Danny got into the engineering program he'd dreamed of, tuition covered by a merit scholarship he'd earned entirely on his own. Ethan had made sure of that much, staying carefully, deliberately out of the process. Ethan Cross went back to Cross Dynamics, but not the same man who'd left it. He restructured the company's community investment arm around exactly the kind of quiet, no-name attached support that had once saved a diner and funded a scholarship. Because he'd learned, finally, the difference between generosity that served a legacy and generosity that simply served people, he and Grace took it slow, exactly as she'd asked. No cameras, no headlines if they could help it, though a few showed up anyway, and by then, neither of them much minded. Otis, for his part, took full and unearned credit for the whole relationship, telling anyone who'd listen at the counter that he'd known from the very first day the toast guy had something real in him. On the 1-year anniversary of the night Ethan first walked through that door with $6.40 and a hole in his jacket lining, he came back to Miller's one more time. Not in disguise, not with a fortune to hide, just as himself. He sat in the same booth by the window. Grace slid in across from him, off the clock for once, and set down 2 mugs of coffee, no charge because some things, she said, should stay exactly as they started. Ask me again, she said, echoing words from a year and a lifetime ago. Ask you what? If it would be so bad, she said, if you started liking me. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. The same gesture, the same booth, the same window, an entire life different. I think, he said, it might be the best thing that ever happened to me. Outside, the Chicago snow was falling soft and steady. Exactly like it had the night, everything finally became honest between them. And inside Miller's Diner, under a neon sign with its apostrophe finally restored, 2 people who'd found each other by accident sat quietly, unhurried, with absolutely nothing left to hide. The end. If this story meant something to you tonight, let me know in the comments. I read every one, and they genuinely keep this channel going. Subscribe and turn on notifications for next week's story. And as always, thank you for spending this hour with me.